Okay, I hope you've had a chance to get a snack, get some drink, to relax a little bit. I know this is a long process, but we got to get into two case studies now. We're going to look at case study number 1 this time, and then in our last video we'll look at case study number 2. Really looking at how did ideologies in the middle of the 1800s, how did they turn into or fuel actions and things that people actually did? What did they do with these ideologies? Because ideas, or more specifically, ideologies, have consequences. They're going to take us somewhere as humans. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, but we're going to dive into it right now, so let's get going. So we left up last time with European, big world, including the United States in this Western world at this time. As we're moving into the 1870s, getting ready to move into the 1880s, we've polarized nations. We've polarized people. Those who are super, super, super strong as a result of the Second Military Revolution and the Industrial Revolution and the production, et cetera, and those who are still way, way, way down. That gap, that difference between the two is much huger. Well, that sparks on some reactions. What can I do with that? We're looking at things like, okay, well, if I have new choices, they're going to bring out new situations. What kind of things can I do with this power? What type of things should I do with this power? That's another big issue. What can I compared to what should I? And based on how you answer that, the choices that you make to respond to that, as the Western world did, it's going to produce new situations that you must deal with, new consequences that you must deal with. And not all of them are good. Some of them turn out really, really bad. So we're going to look at two. The case studies that we're going to look at for this video and for our next video is going to be the British occupation of Egypt, and then the Berlin Conference and the result of the Berlin Conference. And again, this is kind of like the domino effect. You start off and you go, bink, and you just knock that first domino. You take that first step. Even if that first step is a positive, you have good intentions, you want to do well, it doesn't necessarily mean that everything is going to follow in a good result. And I really wanted to look at this because we focus so much on Machiavelli's motto, what he wrote about the human passions always being the thing that fuels human action. And we've looked at a lot of the negative, the greed, the power hungry, the love for money, those types of things, the love for prestige and self-preservation. Those are possibly negatives. And I think there's a flavor of it that's negative. But Machiavelli didn't mean it only that evil is what's pushing the veins and blood through human bodies. There's also the intent for good, the intent to do better by others, the intent to help. These are also part of human nature. The problem comes in is can it be sustained? I may start off well, but can I finish well? What happens when I bring other people into the mix? Are they coming in with just as much determination to do well and good as I was when I first started? Or how about how to implement it? I have a good idea. I want to do well. I want to bring a good to a people. But the way the people others went over and implemented that or saw to that happened, were they in the right place? Does their passions inform them and shape them correctly? So I wanted to do these two because these two give a little bit of that, a good intention, but flick, things go bad. So we're going to look at the first one. Case number 1, British occupation of Egypt. This is about 1882. So pre-occupation, what's going on just before this 1882 time frame? Well, Egypt is growing economically. They're doing really, really well. They opened up the Suez Canal in 1869. Now you have lots of trade going on back and forth. They become the focus and center of the whole world. This is the celebration. It's a sketch of the celebration of the opening of the Suez Canal. I mean, it's everybody who's anybody is there. This is a huge deal. East now meets West, so to speak. And not only for trade and for military movement, but also just for travel and expansion of ideas and people moving from Europe and going to India and spending time there, in China and Indonesia and Australia. This allows for so much more movement and luxury and entertainment even. So this is a big deal. And Egypt is adapting as best it can to the Industrial Revolution and these big nations. It does this despite the fact that the Ottoman Empire, in which it belongs, by the 1870s is kind of viewed as the sick man of Europe. Remember we talked about that a while ago when we were talking about the Crimean War? They're really struggling to kind of adapt European-style military forces. It's very expensive. They don't have any real revenue-generating system. They don't have taxes per se. So what do? How do they stay up? How do they keep things going? Well, they borrow money from European banks. Always borrowing money. The problem with that is you got to pay it back. And unfortunately, if you don't have a revenue stream, something coming in, income coming in, it makes it really, really hard to pay your debts back. So the Ottoman Empire is really starting to crumble, even though Egypt is a part of that, but is doing very, very well, or at least, for the most part. The Ottomans lose the Second Russian-Turkish War between 1877 and 1878. And certain Balkan territories are beginning to be taken away from the Ottoman Empire. Very similarly to back in the Crimean War, but this time it's successful. Question to ponder though, thinking back to the Crimean War and how England and France reacted to Russia's attempt to take the Constantinople and those straits. What do you think England and France are going to do at the end of the Second Russian-Turkish War, in which Russia wins the independence of many of those same Balkan kind of states? What do you think is going to happen? Do you think they're just going to say, okay, that's fine? No. They're going to get their fingers in it again. Because they have to maintain the balance of Europe, balance of power. What a joke. Anyway. There's also an economic backlash during this time, though, right up to coming up into the 70s, that bleeds out of the American Civil War. During the American Civil War, the southern supply of cotton drops. People are not working the fields, they're not harvesting and sending stuff to Europe, they are fighting. So Europe turns to Egypt as the primary source of cotton and textiles. And Egypt goes crazy. Yeah, go ahead. And they have this big boom year, huge amounts of sales to Europe. And they make a lot of money during that time. So what do? We're making lots of money, means we can pay it back. That means we can go over and borrow money so that we can invest back into our home, our homeland. We can nationalize and build ourselves up. We can become stronger. We don't want to be like the rest of the Ottoman Empire. We want to be strong. So they do that. They start investing and they start borrowing from, again, European banks. And the problem with that is, after the Civil War, instead of staying with European cotton, the Western Europe looks back to the United States for its supply. They drop England, Egypt, like a hot potato, and go back to the cotton supplies out of the United States. Well, that causes Egyptian economy to completely crash. It just takes a major nosedive. Now, Egypt can't pay back their debts. They can't pay back their loans. So, the wonderful people in Western Europe, they say, we have an idea. we will implement dual control. What does that mean? What does dual control mean? Well, it looks sort of like this. You owe me money. You have some income, i.e. the Suez Canal, people pay to get through that, and Egypt was making money off that. Tell you what, that's your major form of income. Since you owe me money and can't pay me back, we are going to kind of step in, and we are going to control your treasury. We're going to control your money-making economy so that we can make sure that you are paying off your debt to us. It will probably be temporary. It's not going to be permanent. Wink, 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 wink. But it was a solution. And what are they going to do? Say no? They can't unless they want to go to war again, and they didn't. They wanted to maintain. So what do? They say, fine, let's do it. So the problem is that when you have dual control, you have dual control collateral. The problems of Egypt become the problem of the second controller, the supervising, managing sort of parent. And that's what happened here. Egypt had problems, and they became Britain's problems. The Egyptian military and the people became very restless. They weren't getting good public services. The Sudanese, which is the country just below Egypt, had been fighting with the Egyptians for a long time. The Muslims were trying to get in and take over Egypt and take it away from the Egyptian people at that time. And so with Britain's like, we don't want to get involved with that. That's not our intention. We're not here to fight your wars. We're just here to take your money and to control your money-making institutions. So the Egyptians appoint this guy, his name is Colonel Urabi, and he rises up an Egyptian force that's not really attached to the British forces that are in that region, and he just starts rioting. He is going to start riots. There are foreigners are being killed. This is just shocking the Britons back at home. What are we supposed to do? I guess we ought to start sending some troops down there, but we really want to be hands off. We really want to focus back home. We don't want to focus outward. We don't want to expand. We don't want to take over new territory. We want to be at home, so let's just send a little bit. And so as it goes, Gladstone, as I said before, he's not an expansionist. He does not want to send a bunch of military down there and take over Egypt. So what can he do? Well, he can just let it sort of ride out, let them do what they want to do, and whoever wins, wins. He could do that. He could pull out all of the foreigners and kind of, bring them out to get them free from being hurt. But the result of that, the optics, they call it today. They call it optics. It's what does the public look or view you as? What's the perception, the public perception? Well, you would look as being very weak. Your reputation as the great military might of the world would be crushed, put into doubt. That could spark enemies to kind of take an advantage. Oh, well, Britain's not willing to go over and fight. Maybe they just don't have the ability. Now's a good time to go beat up on Britain. So again, it's like I gotta protect my sense of being powerful. So what do we do? And then what's going to happen if somebody takes over the Suez Canal that's not friendly with us? What happens to all our bank accounts? What happens to our debt that we want to have Egypt pay off? We can't just let anybody take it over because we'll lose all that money. Not a good stance. So final choice is Britain goes to Egypt and temporarily, air quotes, temporarily takes control of Egypt. But again, that kind of brings you, it kind of puts you in the same situation as whatever Egypt's in. And the Sudanese fighting between Egypt and the Sudanese, that hasn't stopped because now England has control of Egypt. Instead, the fighting keeps on going. And there's a general, Charles Gordon, he's a British general. He decides he's going to go down there and help the Egyptian military, the Egyptian troops, invade or go into the Sudan and put down these rebel troops, these fighters, these Muslim slave traders that are trying to invade and take over Egypt. The problem is he and his people get trapped, and then this place where they're trapped becomes under siege, and then they're all killed. So now what does Britain do? Do they just let their guy die? So here comes that, boop, domino effect. You went into Egypt just to maintain some sense of self-preservation. You wanted your debts paid off. You wanted to be able to protect Egypt and its interests so that they can pay your interest back. That was the intention, supposedly. I'm sure that there are historians that think that they just went in there just to go over and ransack all of Egypt, and much of history has been sort of worded like that in the 20th century and continues to this day. It's just everybody in Europe was just horrible. They had no good intentions at all. I don't believe that. I believe humans can be good. They can have good intentions. And this was one of those that I think was the evidence shows that they wanted to do well. Yes, they wanted to preserve their finances, their economy, but they would do it in a peaceful way, in a helpful way. Sadly, they get down there and they're forced to fight Egypt's battles. Finally, in 1898, the Sudanese are put down. But now, who's going to control the Sudan? Who's going to control that southern country? Well, I guess it's got to be Britain again. So now Britain has to, is sort of like forced to, take control of both Egypt and the Sudan. And their intention was just to get their money back. Their intention was to protect their own. They didn't want to be in there. Gladstone says he doesn't want to be in there. Yet, he has to do something. So here's your question for this case study. What ideologies trigger the other European countries to act? What happens? What's going on now? So, Britain has come in. They've taken over some form of control. It's kind of a protectorate of Egypt. They've had to go over and protect Egypt. They had to go over and jump into Sudan. Now they have two parts of African continent. What is the rest of the world going to do? What ideologies, go back to what we were talking about before a couple weeks, what ideologies are starting to play out in their head as they're watching Britain take over this particular region of the world? That's a very interesting kind of deal. But it's not the only one. It's not the only case study I want to give you. I want to give you another case study that brings up an even more horrid end. And that's the Berlin Conference and what takes place as a result. And that's next